And just a quick explanation of what this is for. You know, alpha from a finance sense is just measuring how an investment strategy outperforms a benchmark or the market. And the idea for this podcast is what are the strategies and tactics that people are using to basically beat the market, beat competitors, other agencies, or other brands in terms of what they're doing for the clients that they're working with. So today we have Jhana, who's a founder of Artifex, which is a direct-to-consumer growth firm. And, what Jhana, in that experience, in starting that agency, has done just a ton of media buying, including clients like the NHL or Live Nation. Also, is it Gozney? Is that how you say it? Yeah, which is a big e-com brand as well. So he's got a ton of experience with meta media buying, has a lot of managed spend under his belt, has worked in a lot of different contexts. So super happy to have him here and just talk in the weeds of meta media buying strategy. And so with that, really the first question is, what do you think is the biggest misconception about, buying media or media, advertising through Meta that most people are saying on direct to consumer Twitter or on LinkedIn? Or what do you kind of see that these quote unquote thought leaders are saying all the time and there's a lot of conversations about, but you just think it's completely false?
I wouldn't lay this charge against some of who I think the best people are in the space are, but I think I see this a lot. And to some degree, I understand why people do it, right? We run companies, we're freelancers, but I think that people generally overestimate the causal role that they themselves as media buyers are actually playing in the revenue generation for a company. And I think it's really twofold, right? There's two layers of it. The first layer is that this misconception that that is the digital ad in isolation that is the thing that is making people buy, when of course we all know in reality, like, the ad is playing some role potentially on getting someone to buy now or buy us because of a specific offer. But the real psychological weight of that decision is coming from product, it's coming from word of mouth, branding, user experience, community, things like that. So as an advertiser, I don't think that I would want to discount the role of the ad in any way, but to say that the ad is the causal factor in the purchase decision, I think is biting off more than you could chew. And I think it goes even deeper than that, because there's the second layer as well, which I think is media buyers are more guilty of, which is it's not just it's not you, the media, right? It's Meta. It's Meta's extremely complex software auction delivery system. It's Google's bidding auction, right? Like, that is the real, magic of the whole process, right? Like, we ourselves are interacting with these incredible tools, and we do that effectively and responsibly. But we see claims like this, that I caused this, or I dropped the CPA, or I tripled revenue, or my work caused this. And I think that we need to move away from this language, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. The one phrase I think of is it the seat or the driver? And, the analogy being like, let's say Formula One, where the drivers always complain about the cars. And then like the engineering team, the mechanics, whoever, is working more on the like pit crew side, are always complaining about the driver. And I think a lot of times media buyers think that they're doing everything, but they are just a driver. It's really the car that they're driving in that allows them to be faster or slower. And I watch a Formula One show on Netflix, and there's this one driver who's complaining all the time about his car. And then he switched cars and he became much faster. And then he started like placing a bunch. And it's like, that is a big important thing. And I've learned this too from my experience, where I will think I drove a lot of success for a brand. And then I start working for a brand that doesn't have any brand buildup, doesn't have any community, hasn't really figured out that product market fit. And it's like you're just slamming your head against the wall repeatedly. And you think, it's like, do I really know anything about how to do this? And so that's the thing too. It's like, I feel like, especially with direct response advertising, you're just accelerating things or amplifying things, but you're not building anything. You're not creating anything really new. You're just figuring out how to make that customer acquisition process a little bit more efficient, and then figuring out how to leverage the tools to do that best. But tell me more about this idea of how Meta and Google and basically these algorithms and how they deliver ads are really the driver here, because that's another interesting thing. And I always hear this from people who don't know a whole lot about the space. They think they can trick Meta, or they're going to like game the system. And I think it's so absurd. It's like, no, figure out how the system works and use it to your advantage. Don't try to like beat the system. You're not going to beat 10,000 machine learning engineers that work for Meta, right? So yeah, can you kind of talk about that and what your experiences been?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think as a general theme, this sense of humbleness, I guess, in terms of your role in the whole process, is important, like both in relation to the wider business, but also in relation to these software tools and these algorithms, right? And like that sense of humbleness doesn't take away from any of the value of the work that you're doing. And if I'm going to think about interacting with these complex systems, you would hope, and I think, we really try to find these, and in many ways, this is our job. Like we want to find little strategic advantages and ways to find exploits or optimizations. Like obviously that is our job, but I think you're right. And I am in full agreement. Like you don't want to swim against the tide, right? These tools are more powerful than our human decision making. And to say otherwise would be pure hubris. So I think that, yeah, in many ways, like you don't want to fight the tide. You want to use these tools and mechanisms to the best of your ability. Some of that is actually maybe listening directly to Meta or listening directly to Google in some key ways, while also understanding you guys have different incentives. And that's where your job as a media buyer or a service provider comes in, is to understand that your incentives are not the same as Meta's incentives or Google's incentives. And it doesn't mean that their tools aren't effective, but you need to keep that in the back of your mind when you're rendering a service, I guess.
Well, let's talk about these case studies you see on Twitter where it's like, and 30 days, we, cut the CAC by 80%, scaled spend 10x. And what do you think are the key misconceptions around that? Like, what do you think is not being said there? What do you think actually potentially happened? What's missing? And then the thing I always love with that too, it's just how you zoom in and out on the performance. So you might have this like crazy improvement, which is actually not related to your work, but then it goes back to, there's a regression to the mean in terms of performance. But people, a lot of times, I feel like just avoid that and they just have the one snapshot of things looking good. But can you kind of walk through like your ideas in terms of, what actually happened there?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and listen, like we're all guilty of this, right? Like
Yeah.
thinking about myself as a budding freelancer many years ago, and it's the same. We're constantly thinking about our position as advertisers in the wider world of business, right? And so, like, we want to believe that we are the ones moving the needle, and to some degree we are. And, and there's also extremely good rhetorical power when speaking to the layman or the prospect in framing your abilities as a service provider as something that really does move the needle. So, like, I'm not confused why people do this, right? It's good for business. It's good for lead gen. It's good for framing the effects of your company. Like, there's no doubt about it. In terms of like, I think I try to do a little bit of soul searching on this front too, like thinking about myself as an advertiser and our company's role in the wider world of e-commerce, right? And like, as I've done this for longer and I have, learned, I guess, more, I think some of the things that I'm really proud of doing now as a company and as a service provider are not as much tied to performance. And that might seem crazy to say as a performance marketer, but like, I'm really proud of something like client retention or, operational excellence or customer experience and things like that. Stuff that isn't directly tied to that attributed revenue number, right? But like in the long view is a true measure of success. If your partner is willing to work with you for 3 to 5 years through periods of incredible performance and really poor performance, I think that's a true sign of success and maybe things that we should actually be proud of.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think too, that also just shows how you've matured as a business owner, right? You're more concerned about the how the business operates and the kind of like success criteria to running a successful business, then starts to overshadow like the kind of what you do on a per client basis and on a performance basis. That's more for the people that you're managing, that people are in your company,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah,
it makes sense.
definitely. I was going to say that I like so very quickly, but like, I had a debate with my friend a couple months ago, and he's a creative guy and he's all about innovation, right? He's a big innovator, and he kept trying to give me the label of innovator, and I was constantly rejecting it because I'm just like, well, I'm not a pie in the sky ideas guy. I just, think that I can operate excellently on a day-to-day basis. It's more about consistency, right? But like, I guess he was pushing me on this, and I think that he's right. And I think you could maybe resonate with this as well as an agency owner. Like, our innovation in my eyes, I guess, is like on the level of service. How can you actually deliver a professional service way better than the rest of the market in a way that is delightful and also extremely effective, right? And like that's where we want to innovate, in addition to being excellent platform providers and market professionals. Like it's the level of service, which I think is really the area that we can move the needle, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Okay. So next question for you. What do most brands, agencies, and even specifically meta media buyers misunderstand about attribution? And I think like just this is such a tough, thorny question. So, and this is something we struggle with in talking about it with clients and really figuring out good partners to work with in terms of attribution, what type of models that we work with and figuring out success on campaigns. But what do you think most people miss? Where's the biggest, I don't know, what's the biggest frustration for you right now? What's going wrong in this space?
Yeah, I love this topic, I guess, actually because of its ambiguity and its complexity, right?
Yeah.
And the frustration, I guess, that it brings. Like, but I think that there are a couple points. So the first one I'll do is rapid fire off. Like, this is really from Taylor Holiday. I won't take any credit for this. In his words, like attribution is not optimization, right? Like looking at your measurement tool, looking at your third party, what Rockerbox or Triple Whale says your meta ads is doing has no impact on optimization, right? In terms of platform delivery and how ads are performing within options. And he says that you're not buying ads with Triple Whale, you're buying ads with Meta. So ultimately you need to keep that in mind. And I won't harp on that point, but I think that the failure, I think in a lot of people is like, thinking that there is not a connection between the attributed measurement and then the optimization of the ad platforms. And I think that that's crucial. But maybe my contribution to the discussion would be more about like, we all love measurements. We all love all of the incredible tools we have access to in the space for sure. And we all love data. But the thing that I often don't see is like good measurement needs to lead to different behavior. And what I mean by this is like, even if you had the perfect measurement system to answer the questions that you might have or to give you the perfect read of what you want to get from attribution, like what would you actually do different? How would you buy media differently? How would you do your copywriting or your branding, your messaging, or how would you render your service differently, right? And like I was having a conversation the other day about one of our clients was really into this tool called Prescient. I think it's a great tool, super interesting. But they were curious about measuring the halo effect of their meta media dollars on their Amazon sales. And the response that I gave back to that is that it's not that it's not useful, but I can tell you right now that your meta media dollars are having a significant effect on your Amazon sales, right? Like what would you actually do differently if you had an attribution reading that confirmed that for you? And so like good measurement is good measurement if it allows you to make better operational or strategic decisions on the other side of it, I guess.
Yep. Yeah, it's funny too, because I feel like people make decisions and then find ways to rationalize it. I mean, we know this as like marketers and advertisers, right? And even you could have perfect attribution and really have a clean look at relative channel performance, whatever. But I feel like even with that, people don't really make decisions based off of what they're seeing in terms of attribution. They're making decisions based off of their gut, based off of some other pressure that they might be having in the business, based off of, advice that someone's given them that hasn't seen that same attribution. And it's like a lot of the decision making, I feel like, is just completely separate from the actual data, performance, analytics, attribution that they might be looking at. And so a lot of times people then go back and rationalize those decisions using that data, but it's backwards basically. Like they go make the decision kind of in isolation or in silo, then they go back and look at the data and they rationalize it after. And then it's also like they're kind of misaligned incentives with it too, where, I mean, we think about this, let's say with the ad platforms, they're incentivized to get as much attribution as possible. So if you ever look like at ad platform pixel data, there's more than 100% attribution, right? Because Google's taking some from Meta, Meta's taking some from Google, and it goes on with other ad platforms. But then remembering too, the incentive for these ad platforms is trying to make themselves look as good as possible. And then it's like, then you have to think of the incentive of agencies, and agencies are obviously incentivized to show that they're doing the best job possible, right? So they're going to take attribution data and make it look as good as possible for them. And then, that also happens with, platforms, like especially when you're working with platform reps, like Google reps, they're going to come in and try to really sell the impact of their, channel. And then you have to recognize their incentive for that too, and how that's going to skew what they're saying in terms of attribution. So it's like, it's really kind of messy in that side too. But I think I'm also like, I'm wondering too and I get this question a lot. On the performance side, how have you solved this attribution question? What's your model for looking at performance of campaigns? What's the mix between using third parties, looking at UTMs, looking at Shopify data, for example? Like, what do you do? How do you kind of get the most accurate picture of the performance of your campaigns?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think first, just to echo your point, I would say, don't attribute the quote, but like, there's lies, damn lies, and statistics, right? Like ultimately exactly what you're saying, like you can use numbers and data to justify any situation in either direction, right? Like, so as a general principle, I guess, and a general framework that I think about is like, we're trying to use numbers, and media buyers, like we try to act as if we were scientists, even though we don't actually act that way. But, we can learn from the scientific method, right? Which is like, the hypothesis comes first, right? You need to make a prediction about what might happen. And then that hypothesis is the thing that sets the framework and the boundaries of what you're going to measure, how you're going to go about measuring it, whether it's verifiable or replicable or things like that. You were totally right that people just go and do the action first, and they look for some sort of number or data point to justify the action, which is not how scientific discovery would approach that. In terms of what I would do, you ask me this question every 12 months, I'm gonna have a different answer, right? But I think what I really am liking right now is looking at dollars and cents from the P&L. Doesn't have to be the P&L. It's just take a look at a daily MER number, take a look at a daily AMER number, or CAC and contribution dollars. Like, there's a way in which these financial numbers are not subject to the whims of attribution, right? Because those are real dollars entering and exiting your bank account. So I think that you need to have some sort of mix of that. I think that because of what I said earlier about optimization being deeply important, I do care about ad platform metrics. I think to throw them out the window is maybe not the right answer either. I'll want to take a look at what Meta says is going on, and we'll want to take a look at what Google says or YouTube or whatever, and use that maybe not as a real ground truth of dollars and cents, but as directional information. I think it's extremely helpful. There's no better spot to see which campaign performed better than the other in Meta than looking at what Meta says, because what Meta says is going to determine where your future dollars go. But I'm also very interested in, what House does, and these other incrementality platforms. Holdout. Again, there's an elegance to that. It's almost analog in a way where it's like, hey, we're just going to show ads to group A, and then we have control group B, and let's look at lift, and we don't need to look at pixels and cookies and MTAs. It's just simple methodology. And I if I were an in-house marketer, and if I were pushing for budget for some expensive tech, I think I would push more for the incrementality tool than the MTA or the third-party attribution read, or even the media mix model, personally.
Yeah, I feel like so much of this is that meme where it's the bell curve, and it's like the smooth brain guy, and it's a guy that's like all stressed out, and then it's like the Jedi, and it's like I feel like a holdout test is like very smooth brain, but also just super effective. And then what's in the middle are all these like MTA, MMM platforms, all this different software. And it's like, oh, we got to use all this, and it's like so much noise. And then there's like complete lack of clarity of like how the tracking of this data, how's it pointed together, like how accurate it is. You just don't really know to a point, and so it's still just kind of directional. But people think they need to add in all these tools, but it really is as simple as like, how much money are you spending? It's like, how much revenue is that generating? Is it profitable? Okay. I think I really like the MER approach because of that. So,
well, I was going to say, I think, I'm not the one that is at all responsible for this shift in our industry, but I think it's extremely valuable, right? Like, talking about dollars and cents as part of your marketing job, for me, has been the biggest unlock in terms of making our service better. Is like, how much contribution dollars did we make yesterday? What can we do differently? How can we behave differently today to make that number be better. And
Yeah.
the paralysis that comes in with having a shit ton of information, right? And like having more of a North Star, an unambiguous kind of North Star, just again, it has that effect on behavior that the MTA or the third party read. The effect on behavior is more paralysis, I guess.
Yeah, it's like I think the term I've heard is information blindness, but you have so much information and so many data points that you don't even know how to read it. It's so much easier just to go as simple as possible, and you can show the clear, impact of things. Okay, last question for you. Seen this a lot of debate on this. People hate ROAS, return on ad spend. Why is this a bad metric to track for performance media buying, or why not? Because I know you might have a different opinion here. So
Yeah. I mean, you'd send me the questions ahead of time, so I had a bit of time to prep, right? But yeah, I don't think it's a bad metric at all, right? Like I think it comes back to this notion of the quest to find the objectively best attribution system, right? And then I would assert that it doesn't exist, because all of these things are they're frameworks, they're methodologies, right? And the real crux of it all is to not find the objectively best measurement system. It's to understand how each measurement system is set up differently, and what reads that would bias you towards. For example, there's nothing objectively better or worse about a last click measure. You just have to understand that what a last click measure is going to give you and how that measurement structure might change the reading that the measure spits out, right? So I think to take ROAS as some sort of a metric, it's like, there's no search for the objectively best metric. I mean, maybe a contribution dollars, but ROAS is something that you, in my opinion, need to use to make decisions in an ad platform. So your ROAS or your meta CPA isn't going to match any real actual dollars and cents. Your meta CPA is not a reflection of what the actual cost of a customer is, or your meta ROAS is not a reflection of the true return on those ad dollars, right? But I think as long as you understand that, ROAS can be an excellent metric, in my opinion, to look at within Meta or within Google, across ads, across ad sets, things like that, within the same measurement framework of Meta's ad platform, which is performing better. And I think that because of that, that's extremely useful. And there's no magic number of a ROAS you need to achieve. Ultimately, that's contextual in your business. But the mistake, I think, with ROAS is thinking that the number you see in Meta somehow maps into financial reality, which it doesn't, but is an extremely useful metric to make in-platform decisions, just as, ROAS, as CPA might be, or spend, quite frankly. I think that's also super important.
yeah. Well, I think for me, I have two big problems, not necessarily with ROAS, but the idea of it. So one is how people myopically just talk about one metric, and they can't think in terms of like a combination of metrics, right? And no, people really struggle with this. They're like, oh, ROAS has to be this, it has to be this. Or it's like, click-through rates don't make sense. Like don't never pay attention to click-through rates. Or it's like CPMs don't matter. As long as your CAC's good, it's fine. Like I might get all that, but the reality is you have to just recognize what each metric is reporting on in terms of that customer acquisition process. So if CPMs are really high, that just means it's expensive to advertise. And then it's like, okay, so you do want to reduce CPMs. You want to reduce that cost to advertise, right? And so you can do that through multiple different ways, like broaden your audience targeting, see if you can improve the quality of your ads. There's all these different things that kind of improve that one metric, but recognize that CPM is just one piece of the puzzle. And you're dealing with like not a insanely complex setup, but you have to recognize that you really need to look at 10 different metrics to get a feel of how things are going, and knowing that you can adjust each of those metrics with different tactics. But I think the challenge I always see is people like ROAS, and then that's kind of it. And then the second thing with ROAS is what your goal is for these campaigns. For example, we work with one client where our goal is to acquire new customers because their customer repeat purchase rate is super high. So what we found with that is they have a product that is a great gateway product. It just gets customers in the door. And if they buy that product first, they're very likely to become repeat customers. The ROAS on that specific product is actually really bad. However, the LTV of those customers who buy the product is really high. And so if we were purely focused on ROAS, we might go and try to advertise for other products that do have higher ROAS, but they're going to have a much lower customer repeat rate, right? And so what we found with that specific client is we don't care about generating more revenue for them every month. All we care about are acquiring new customers that are very likely to become repeat customers, right? And so that's our goal, right? Our goal is not to drive as much revenue as possible for that business. And that's where ROAS would potentially be a goal. But I think too, it's like what people have to realize is each of these metrics in terms of performance, whether it's CAC or ROAS, they should be based on the goal that you have as a media buyer for that client and based on the client's goals for growth, right? If it's just net new customers, you got to focus on new customer acquisition cost. If it's generating as much revenue as possible, focus on ROAS. If it's profitability, but your lower ROAS products might actually be more profitable from a contribution margin perspective. And so then you want to optimize towards those, right? So you really have to figure out what the brand's goals are and then figure out what your KPI is from there. And I think people don't understand that. They just like blindly look at ROAS and they're like, oh, it's really good or really bad. Like people ask me all the time, what's a good ROAS? And I'm like, what's your business model? Right? Because like I see this all the time with B2B, people on Twitter who are like advertising for these B2B products, right? And they're like, our ROAS is 1,000%. And it's like, well, no shit. Like you just sold $1 million product, right? And it like, that makes total sense. But that's the thing too, is like, it's so dependent on the business model. It could be radically different ROAS or it could be a radically different goal. And I think people don't understand that nuance and how important it is to kind of figure out what that is.
Yeah, totally agree with you, man. I mean, these metrics are contextual, right? They're so context dependent on the product, the margin profile of the product or the offer, or, and anything you see in the platform is ultimately a reflection of some sort of outside business reality, right? So like to look at the in-platform thing as something to strive for, like it doesn't make sense, right? And, also you have the breakdown effect, right? Like sometimes you spend more and ultimately the ad will be able to sustain more spend by the ROAS slowly coming down over time. And like you say, that's not necessarily a bad thing. So I mean, like any number, like any read, like any measurement, it's like understand the wider context. And I think that I'm convinced that there's a delta between what people talk about online for the media buying and like how like professional they're actually operating for clients who have legitimate businesses to run, right? So yeah, I mean, you see tons of bullshit on the internet. I'm not convinced that like people who work at extremely good D2C brands are being led astray by that chatter, I guess.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, that's the intention of this, what we're doing here, right? We're talking about this in a candid way because we've done this a bunch and we're talking about the reality here. And I think the reality is everything has so much nuance to it. It's really hard to get it down to some neat, clean little text LinkedIn post where it's just a couple of lines. It's like, want to drop your CACs by 50%, do these 5 steps. It's like never going to happen. So, I guess, with that, we're up on time. I really appreciate this conversation. I think, there's some really good insights here. Do you have anything else you'd want to say or anything else you want to talk about? Any other questions, comments, thoughts?
Yeah, no, it's great, man. I think it's super cool you're doing all this. You're right to try and provide some higher value content. And I don't know, I don't want to be online personally. It's nice to have you put me in a context where I actually feel like I could be online. So it's a testament to what you're doing here. So thank you for that.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being here. And great conversation.
Cheers, man.